This is the GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 202 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with filmmaker Cintia Cabib about her garden-related documentaries. The plant profile is on Portulaca, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events and this week's garden tasks in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on flower power for your Veggie patch from Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Cintia Cabib. She is a documentary filmmaker and creator. Welcome, Cintia.
Hi, Kathy. It's great to be.
Great to have you. So I should say you have many hats that you wear, from independent producer, videographer, and editor, and you've made many award-winning programs, but we're going to dive into all of that, including your garden-related documentaries that you've made. But before we do that, Cintia, we want to dial it back all the way back to baby Cintia and ask if you were born with a green thumb or chlorophyll in your veins.
I don't think that I was, Kathy. My mother was an amazing gardener, and so I always admired all the beautiful flowers that she planted. And so was my grandmother, who lived in Argentina. I'm from Argentina originally. But when we moved here, I always admired my mother's beautiful garden and flowers. My main job here at home is to take care of 15 indoor plants. So I'm surviving and thriving. And my sister is the gardener in the family right now, and she has the green thumb.
And so when you came from Argentina with your family, did you settle in the Washington, D.C. region?
We did.
And so when you got here, there was obviously a bit of adjustment. Was that as a teenager or an older child?
I was 6 years old when we moved to the United States, and I didn't know any English. And so at the time, there was no bilingual education programs or English as a second language program. So I was pretty much thrown into the first grade, had to learn English pretty much on my own. But when you're young, you pick it up quite quickly. But it was a shock in the beginning. It was difficult.
I can imagine. Yeah, when I came, I was born in Germany, and I was in an army preschool, and I was told no German, only English. So yeah, you learn fast.
That's right. Yeah.
So how did you pursue being a documentary filmmaker? Was that your always career ambition? Were you always a visual artist?
No, I wasn't. When I was in college, I actually majored in international relations. And later, I went to grad school at the University of Florida, and I received my master's degree in Latin American studies. During that time, I worked with several organizations that dealt with immigration and refugee issues. And with my fluency in Spanish and my background in Latin American studies and international relations, I actually thought that I was going to continue going down that career path. But one day I was watching a documentary, I think it was on PBS, and I got it into my head that, that would be really interesting to pursue producing documentaries. And so I started taking classes, video production classes, at what was then called Montgomery Community Television. Now it's known as Montgomery Community Media in Rockville, Maryland, and started taking classes there. And then I started producing programs really on a volunteer basis. And I just really loved it. And then I was hired to work there as a teaching assistant. And then I moved up to working video production instructor. And then I was the director of our training department, where I oversaw and managed our video production classes, workshops. I wrote a newsletter. I also produced programming for the station. And so I worked there for almost 20 years, a little bit over 19 years. And during that whole time, I was also producing independent documentaries. So I was um, sometimes getting funding for them. Other times, my job, you know, I used the income from my job to also help produce documentaries. So that was an has been an interest of mine now for probably, like, over 35 years now.
Wow. So, do you still have a separate full-time job, or is this your full-time job as an independent filmmaker?
Now it's my full-time job.
Interesting. And so, how do you pick the subjects of your documentaries?
I've always really been interested in producing programs that focus on the Washington, D.C. area community, on
Hmm.
people, places, neighborhoods, local history. And so I'll find a subject that interests me and maybe I know a little bit about, and then it kind of grows from there. So it might be from reading articles in the paper. That's how I got interested in producing a documentary about 7 different community gardens in Washington, D.C. It might be someplace that I had visited before, and that's how I produced a documentary about the Glen Echo Park Carousel and its history in Glen Echo, Maryland. It could be, that I came across a beautiful painting on a brochure during a DC History conference that I was attending, and that painting led me to produce a documentary about a painter and her niece and their special bond and the history of Washington, D.C. during the era of segregation and the really challenges that Black artists faced during that time. Really, I think that my documentaries have really focused on the arts, the environment, multicultural issues, local history, just a little bit of everything, but something that interests me that I discover, and then I want others to discover it through.
And I can imagine many of these documentaries are multi-year projects. So, from when you get the idea to when it finally has its debut screening, what's the typical timeline for that?
I would say usually it's about 3 years,
Hmm.
maybe a little bit more, and a lot of it has to do with finding funding. Because it's really challenging find funding for independent documentaries. And so that takes time, and there are different places have different funding deadlines that don't always align with your production schedule, and also just the research that's involved, finding people to interview, filming all the visuals that you're going to include in the documentary, the editing portion. So it does take a while to produce a documentary. So you really have to love the subject that you're focusing on because it does take time to do that.
Hmm. And I can imagine that the fundraising part is not your favorite part.
It's not my favorite part, but I've gotten pretty good at writing grant proposals. So, yeah, that's the part that I love is really the producing and the editing
Mm.
portion of it.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question is what part of the process do you really enjoy? So it's after you actually have photographed it or videoed it when you're in the studio editing it?
Well, I think that it's a combination. One is I do enjoy filming and conducting the interviews and getting to know people, just like I said, filming all the visuals elements and the sound elements that are involved. And I do also love the editing part because now I have all the material and I'm going to figure out how to put the story together and how to combine the story, with all the visuals and the sound, the natural sound, as well as the music. And that's a very creative process. And so I really enjoy that part of it.
Hmm. And most of yours are in the half hour range or shorter documentaries, not feature length.
I've only done one feature length, and the rest are half hour or shorter.
Mhm. I imagine it makes it a little bit harder in the editing because all the stuff you might want to have included.
That's true, but at the same time, it really makes you focus on what is really important to include in a
Mhm.
documentary. You really want to keep people's attention, and so I don't like to make them too long.
Mhm. Well, we interviewed you for Washington Gardener magazine for a profile in that in spring 2010. So a long time ago, but it seems like yesterday, Cynthia. And that mainly focused on your documentary that had come out around then, A Community of Gardeners. And I had seen that, I think, 3 times before I talked to you for that interview. And I've watched it a few times since. Occasionally, I'll see it on a local PBS station. Haven't seen it recently, but let's talk a little bit about that and how that one came about and some of the history of that.
A community of gardeners really came about because I had been reading articles, mostly in the Washington Post, about community gardens in Washington, D.C. And so I just really became interested in the whole kind of aspect of community gardens, the the fact that it was, you know, in an urban place where people could have a plot of land and grow fruits and vegetables. And I was interested in how that helped people in terms of, better nutrition, how it helped them also in terms of just really gardens as places of healing also for people who were maybe undergoing personal difficulties or
Mm,
just people enjoying being out in nature. Also, I was liked how community gardens helped kids too just be outside, grow their own plants and vegetables. And so I decided to pursue producing a documentary about 7 different community gardens, each of which was in Washington, D.C., and each of which served a different part of the population. So, for example, one of them was the Fort Stevens Community Garden, and that one I was interested in because it was a multicultural garden where you had people from all different countries growing food that was native to their homelands. Another one, for example, was the 7th Street Garden, which actually later became Common Good City Farm. It had to move to a new location, and that was a garden that at the time provided produce for free for people who worked in the garden. So for exchange for working in the garden, people received fresh produce, and it also used for the pantry for bread for the city at the time. Another one was the Melvin Hazen Community Garden, which I think has changed its name since then. And that one I decided to focus on because it was actually a victory garden, during World War II, and it was still going, so people still had plots
mhm.
there. So the history part was, I thought, was very interesting to include. Also, the Washington Youth Garden at the National Arboretum. At the time, they had a program for parents and kids to grow fruits and vegetables. So I was interested in really featuring these gardens, really to explore how how community gardens in many different ways. So it wasn't really, how to in terms of, well, how do you prepare the soil, or how do you grow this special type of vegetable or a fruit. It was really an exploration of community gardens and the roles that community gardens play in terms of places for social interaction, as I mentioned, places for immigrants, to grow their own fruits and vegetables that are native to their homelands, places for, kids to be in nature, um, places for, so that was really the focus of the piece.
Mhm. Yeah, I find when I watch it, it's very people-oriented, so it's more a focus on the personalities and the people who make up the gardens, and I do love the title, "A Community of Gardeners," because that, I think, says it all right
Yeah.
there. It's not just a community garden, it's about the gardeners who make up that garden or gardens, plural, as in this documentary,
Right.
and I you had a really good reception when it came out
Mhm.
as to responses to it. Where have this documentary in particular taken you? Have you been to some national conferences or shown it to particular groups?
Oh, yeah. Well, the documentary, it premiered at the Environmental Film Festival in the nation's capital, and that was really nice. There were 2 separate screenings of it. And then I did show it at, different conferences. I showed it locally, for example, at the, US Botanic Garden, for example. I mean, it was shown in a lot of different places. One of the government agencies showed it uh, during, let's see, well, it was in April during Earth Month. I remember we had a couple of showings. I had a lot of people purchased it all throughout the country to show it at an environmental organization, at places that focused on community gardens. So yeah, that resulted in a lot of screenings, film festivals, a lot of different venues, places that just wanted to screen it like for members of their organization or their volunteers. So yeah, so that was really satisfying that people made use of it. And
Mhm.
also a lot of, universities hosted screenings or purchased it for their university libraries. So, yeah, so that was great because I really want people to be able to use my documentaries as tools, and as also, not just information, but also for inspiration as
Mhm.
well.
And where can somebody access to watch it now?
The website is communityofgardeners.com, and they can there's a purchase link, and they can purchase a DVD. I still have DVDs, or they can also rent it and stream it.
Good to know it's still available, and I would think some of those people who were in that documentary back then, 15 years plus ago, that they would be the most interested, especially maybe their children or family, in still being able to have access or seeing it. Do you run into any of those past subjects?
I haven't, and sadly, several people passed away too.
Mm.
One of the older gardeners whom I
Hmm.
interviewed. So that was sad, but, I haven't actually run across those gardeners, and, people leave, but yeah, but we did have what the really nice part about the screenings too is that often I invited people who were in the film to talk about their experiences. They were people who either maybe started a community garden, were very involved in it, or people who had their own plot, both kids and adults. So it's always nice to involve the people who are in your documentary in discussions to talk about the film.
And I remember you told a story about you were going out to film one of the gardeners, and he was going to show you his beans or harvest them, and that you actually arrived a day early, and then that worked out serendipitously because there had been a theft in the garden.
Right. The Fort Stevens Community Garden was a
Mm.
garden where there was theft, unfortunately, and there is theft in other gardens as well. And I don't know why, but I just had this feeling that I should get there a day early, and I did. And yeah, the poor gardener, he was from the Dominican Republic, and they had stolen a lot of his beans. Fortunately, not all of them, so he was able to harvest a good quantity of them.
A lot of times with your documentaries, because you're unscripted and because you are interviewing real people, you probably are talking to people who have never been on camera or recorded in that way before. How do you make them feel at ease and comfortable in that setting?
I usually send my interview subjects questions in advance just to give them a general idea of the types of questions I'll be asking them so they feel prepared. And then during the interview, always ask them if they can answer my questions in a complete sentence because they're the ones who are going to be telling the story. Usually don't have a narrator. I have had narrators for some documentaries, but usually I don't. And then I always make sure that I'm very attentive to what they're saying and listen to what they're saying and follow up on certain questions that I might not have scripted in advance, depending on what they say. So I try to make them as comfortable as possible. Usually I'll just ask them some questions in the very beginning before we actually start the formal interview about, what's their favorite hobby or if they're a place that they like to go on vacation, just to get them comfortable before we actually start the actual interview.
I think all those are great techniques, and I think they really show in your documentaries because they seem so natural, Cynthia.
Thank you.
And so another documentary you made, I think our listener gardeners would be interested in is the one about labyrinths. Can you talk about that?
Yes, that was a half-hour documentary called Labyrinth Journeys, and Labyrinth Journeys explores 7 different labyrinths in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, and the role that they play as tools for meditation, rehabilitation, providing people uh, a place to be close to nature. So I chose 7 labyrinths, again, very different from one another, just like the gardens were very different from one another. It was kind of inspired by a community of gardeners because I saw how these community gardens, as I mentioned before, were really places of healing. And labyrinths there, it's an ancient symbol and structure. And they're usually circular in nature, and they have a path that leads to the center and then back out again. And so people walk these labyrinths in different, really, environments. So, for example, a labyrinth or several different labyrinths in hospital or medical settings, a labyrinth in a garden setting, another one on a rooftop, another one in a school, another one at Washington National Cathedral, and the people who use these labyrinths and how it's affected them.
Yeah, I think your documentary about labyrinths, even though it wasn't directly related to gardens, because they are these healing outdoor spaces. Some of them might use plants, but rarely it's more hardscapes. Still is of great interest to gardeners, and I know so many who have experienced labyrinths and healing gardens and got a lot of inspiration from that documentary.
Yeah, I really enjoy them, and also for the documentaries that I produce, I'm really looking also, very much into these visual elements. So, for example, the community gardens, I think, are just beautiful when you see them because people not only grow fruits and vegetables, but they grow flowers in their gardens and labyrinths too. It's very interesting to see the patterns and how they're made, and a lot of them are very artistic. And the one that I mentioned that was in a garden is just very
Mhm.
striking, and how it fits so well in the garden setting also. So yeah, so that's also what I'm looking for. It really has to have that strong visual
Mm.
element.
That's a great point. I wouldn't even have thought of that for documentary filmmaking. I was just always focusing on the people and not the visuals that you would be using while telling that story. So those obviously have to be there.
Right.
And your most recent documentary is called Bird Walk, correct?
That's right.
And that's about a golf course or former golf course in Rockville, Maryland that became a bird sanctuary of sorts.
Right. Yeah, this one was very interesting. I learned about Redgate Park and Redgate Golf Course, which then became Redgate Park, from a friend of mine, Vicki Bailey. Actually, she was one of the people featured in Labyrinth Journeys. She's the one who has the garden labyrinth in Garrett Park. And Vicki got in touch with me, and she told me that she and a group of other birders had been birding at the old Redgate Golf Course, which was owned by the city of Rockville and had closed at the end of 2018. The city of Rockville was not happy with how the golf course was maintained. They felt it was deteriorating, so they ended their contract with the management company that was running the golf course. So soon after the Redgate Golf Course, which was a public golf course in Rockville, closed, people started birding there. And Vicky told me that in just 3 months, she and a group of other birders had seen 123 species of birds. And I was just really amazed because I am familiar with the backyard birds or the neighborhood birds that I see, such as an American robin or a blue jay, a northern mockingbird. Those types of birds are northern
Mm-hmm.
cardinal that you typically see in your garden or around the neighborhood. But I didn't know that there were so many species of birds and they were just 20 minutes from my home. I was not a birder. But these are the types of stories that I love. And so in January 2020, I went out to Redgate. At the time, it was called Redgate Park, even though it wasn't really officially a park at that time. And I took my camera with me and I filmed the Montgomery Bird Club leading a bird walk there. And during the bird walk, there was a lot of conversation about what is going to happen to this place. Is it going to be developed on? Is it going to be a green space? Are there going to be soccer fields here? What's going to happen? And so I thought it was a really interesting story. And again, visually, I love the idea of showing all these species of birds. And for a while, I started filming mostly the activities that were involved in mostly it was the grassroots campaign that was advocating to the Rockville City Council and mayor that this golf course be transformed into a public park and not
Mm-hmm.
to be developed on. Now, while I was filming that, I realized that the camera that I had was not going to work for filming birds. I really needed a camera with a telephoto lens because you can't get too close to birds. They're going to fly away. You're not going to be able to capture them. So you need to have a longer lens to be able to film them. That took a while for me to really convince myself that I should get a camera and that I should try to capture these birds because I had never done that before. And so my filming really began in earnest in the fall of 2021. And during that time, I started interviewing birders who had gone to Redgate and also people who were involved in this campaign to help preserve the space. It's 131 acres as a public park. And then I purchased a camera at the end of 2021 that had the telephoto lens, and I started filming the birds there. And that took 2 years really to get enough variety of species to include in my documentary. And then, of course, during that time, I was also seeking
Mm.
funding for the documentary. So I did spend a lot of my own unpaid time filming birds. And then I also received grants to help with the filming and the editing and the sound editing that really specialized sound editing in which I needed to go to a specific post-production house that specialized in sound to really get nice audio of the bird calls and songs which I
Mm.
recorded with my
Mhm.
camera.
Yeah, watching the birdwalk documentary, it's amazing how much footage of the birds you did get, and it's such a beautiful landscape there. So it's again a former golf course that was fairly well taken care of by the city, I guess, and has various plantings, some ponds, some older trees, some newer plantings. Can you give update on what Red Park is doing now and what the birders are doing now?
Well, because of this grassroots campaign, I think it had a lot to do with the mayor and city council at the time to decide that the land was not going to be developed on and become a public park. Officially now, it's called Redgate Park and Arboretum. And the city of Rockville received a grant a pretty large grant, plant probably, I think, like maybe 1,000 or more trees there at Redgate. And they're planning on having a community garden there as well, a nature playground. They are going to probably have more paths and hopefully I'm hoping they'll repair a lot of the paths that are there because they are, kind of uneven in terms of the paths for walking. So they do need to be repaired. They also are planning on having a small amphitheater there. Also, there's uh, there's like a small, kind of like a monarch, butterfly garden was planted, not as part of the master plan that Rockville has, but this was, a local Girl Scout troop with the help of one of the people, Wayne Breslin, who's, who started the group Friends of Redgate Park, that they have there in Redgate Park. So they have this really nice little garden that they've planted there. So the outlook is really positive. It's a multi-year master plan, and the birding there is still going on a daily basis. Redgate Park is called an eBird hotspot. eBird is a service that's run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and a hotspot is really any public place where people can go birding and where you can usually find a pretty large number of bird
Mhm.
species. And so when I started the documentary, and when I started and ended it, not quite ended it, but during the production of the documentary, there were 163 bird species that had been cited. Now it's 173 species that have been cited, so the number has grown by 10. So that's great news. And what I learned while I was producing the documentary is that since 1970, during the past 50 years, the bird population in North America has declined by 30%, which is a loss of almost 3 billion birds. A lot of it is due to habitat loss. And so that's why places like Redgate Park are so important, because they are used not only by year-round resident birds, like the ones that we see here, the cardinals and the blue jays and the mockingbirds, but they're used by migratory birds that have a very long distance to
Mhm.
cover. Many of them come as far down as South America, and they migrate up to, Canada, and then they migrate back. So these places are super important for migratory birds
Mhm.
also.
And I do love that it's got that arboretum designation now, and they're adding, as you say, a community garden, a native garden, and pollinator garden. So you can see great things for Redgate Park in the future and how accessible it is and open it is to the public. And it's a great example of what can be done of reuse of a golf course or other unused landscape. And that does bring us to a current issue that's happening in the Washington, D.C. area, which is the Rock Creek Park golf course is looking to expand or take back a portion of what was a golf course by removing, I think it's several thousand trees. If I'm not sure if that's correct, but you can correct me on that, Cynthia. So I know that there's a great amount of interest now that Birdwalk is out from the people who are trying to fight that expansion of the Rock Creek Park golf course.
Right. There is a campaign called Rock Creek Park Golf Course for All. And what happened is that the National Park Service approved a plan to cut down 1,200 trees, to renovate the golf course in Rock Creek Park. And when they had announced that, think people were upset because they felt like they hadn't gotten any time to publicly comment or to give their opinions, their thoughts on what should be done in terms of the golf course. Rock Creek Park, again, is another eBird hotspot, wonderful place to bird, and a lot of wildlife there, not just birds, but a lot of other wildlife as well. And the community felt like their voice had not been heard, they organized and they put together a website called Rock Creek Park Golf Course for All, really motivate people to write to, people in the in the government, administration. I think it's the Interior Department, to really get them to think about this plan and not to cut down all these trees, many of which I think are heritage trees. And these trees are so important for birds as, places for food and nesting sites and protection for birds. That's really important habitat. And we had a screening a few weeks ago at Busboys and Poets in Washington, D.C., where we screened Birdwalk, the documentary, and following the screening, we had a discussion, and several people who were part of the panel have been involved in this campaign to try to get, the Park Service not to tear down all these trees, which are so important for birds. And so the screening really hopefully helped inspire and motivate people to become part of this campaign. And we'll see what happens. I think that there's going to be another hearing about it in September.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of ironic because my documentary is about a golf course which was no longer in existence, and people didn't want it, the land to be developed on, and the city decided that they no longer wanted this golf course because they didn't feel it was well maintained. And then we have this other situation with Rock Creek Park Golf Course, which is there, and they felt that it really needed to be renovated. And so now there's this clash
Mm-hmm.
going on between those who want to renovate the golf course, and by doing so, they want to, knock down all these trees. So, yeah, it's kind of an interesting situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a lot of people who are very
Yeah.
passionate
I think
on the
there's a lot
issue.
of passion on both sides of that, and I can see, the golfers who want to be able to reclaim or use that golf course at its peak, and then those who want to keep the trees and the shade and the wildlife. So keep, yeah,
And I think there are a lot of golfers who are not necessarily for
correct,
knocking down
yeah,
all those trees
yeah.
also.
I've
So,
spoken
yeah,
to
so they have to listen to the
Yeah,
golfers
I've
too.
spoken to several who say we don't need that land. So there's a range of opinions, but I just hope it becomes a more open public transition and decision making process, because I
Right.
think that was the big flaw in this whole system, is that the public wasn't notified, and this was a big surprise to a lot of people in the surrounding area, to the
Mhm.
golfers themselves who might like or dislike the plan. Nobody was given a say. So I think that's the stumbling point right there.
Yeah, yeah. So I hope that the film will, not only for this case locally with Rock Creek, but as you mentioned, other places in the United States, there has been a decline in golf courses in the U.S. A lot of golf courses have closed, and several of them have become, nature preserves, for example. But others, they're still, what's going to happen to them? Are they going to be developed? Are they not going to be
Hmm.
developed? So I'm hoping that again, this documentary will really motivate people, inspire them, show them how important these habitats are for birds and for people and other wildlife, and get them to really work on a grassroots level in their town, in their city, to convert these places to wildlife habitats or nature
Hmm.
preserves or
Yeah, I
parks.
think it gives a new point of view and focus on an issue that a lot of people are not aware of, because the decline of golf courses, you would think, oh, they're booming, but that is not the case in all situations.
Right,
And
yeah.
how can some of our listeners access or watch Birdwalk?
Right now, I'm having, screenings of Birdwalk, so they are in-person screenings, and eventually there will also be virtual screenings. I'm working on a platform for virtual screenings. So the next 2 in-person screenings will take place in October. On Saturday, October 19th from 12 to 2 p.m., there will be a free screening at the Smithsonian's Anacostia Community Museum. And on Tuesday, October 22nd at 11 a.m., there will be a free screening at Brookside Gardens in Wheaton, Maryland, hosted by Montgomery Parks as part of Birdability Week. I have on the website Birdwalk Film. I will be listing those screenings so people can check on upcoming screenings for the documentary, which are on the website. Let's see, they can also get on the Facebook page, which is at Redgate Park Birds, or the Instagram page, which is at Birdwalk Film. So those social media links are on the birdwalkfilm.com website. So it'll take you directly to those social media links. And on the website, people can also sign up for news and updates about the film. So that way they'll know about screenings and how to register for them, what's coming up in terms of the film.
Yeah, and I imagine a lot of our listeners who are outside the Washington, D.C. area, they'll be looking forward to notification when it's available online or to screen on maybe a streaming service.
Yeah, right now I'm not doing a streaming service, but I will be working on a platform. And what that will allow people to do is to host their own screenings of the film. So, for example, if an organization, whether it's in the Washington, D.C. area or any state in the United States or even any country, wants to host their own screening of the film, be it in person or virtual, they will be able to work with me to host a screening. I will be able to provide them with a link, to do either a virtual or in-person screening. So that's coming up. I'm working on that platform now, getting it all ready to go. And again, that'll be probably within the next month or so be on the website for people who want to host their own screening.
And in the meantime, how can listeners contact you directly?
They can contact me by emailing me. My email is Cintia, Cintia, at CintiaCabib.com. So it's at CintiaCab as in boy.com. They can also go to my website, CintiaCabib.com, and there's a contact there. And again, I receive those emails directly. They can go to birdwalkfilm.com, and there's a contact there, and that goes to my email. So there's a lot of different ways that they can reach me. They can reach me via I have an Instagram handle for Birdwalk, which is at birdwalkfilm. They can reach me there.
Great.
So yeah, a lot of different ways.
And what do you have in the works, Cintia? Can we look forward to any other garden-related documentaries coming up?
Right now, I'm really busy with Birdwalk. So I spent all this time producing it. So now it's really important to get it out to the public. And so that's what I'm going to be working on over the next year and probably more. In the meantime, I have a few ideas percolating in my head, but nothing set in stone.
We'll have to look out for those and keep in contact. And we'll put some of those links in our show notes to the websites you mentioned and to your social media. Any final thoughts or comments you want to make to our listeners, Cintia?
Well, I hope that I see some or all of your listeners at one of our upcoming screenings of Birdwalk.
Thank you, Cintia.
Thank you, Kathy.
Portulaca plant profile. Portulaca is an easy care, heat-loving, and drought-tolerant annual plant. It has large cup-shaped flowers and attractive succulent-like foliage. Purslane, Portulaca oleracea, and Portulaca grandiflora, are very similar. Purslane has flat, teardrop-shaped leaves, and Portulaca has thin, needle-like or cylindrical leaves. They are winter hardy in USDA zones 10 to 11. These plants have vibrantly colored flowers that bloom all summer long. They close up at night and pop back open when the sun hits them again in the morning. Deadheading is not required. They do well in mixed containers, baskets, and garden beds, as well as a ground cover. It's also known as the moss rose. They are attractive to bees and other pollinators. Portulaca is deer resistant. They do best in full sun with good draining soils. They prefer light watering, fertilizing, monthly or sparingly. Portulaca, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, the heat wave has finally broken. I'm enjoying the blooms of my black-eyed Susan and the scent of the blooming gardenia I have potted by my back door. Over at the community garden plot, we've sampled our first Sungold tomatoes, and I'm making more batches of pesto from our basil. In the garden tips that we shared this week on our social media, we offered more tomato growing tips and also started a week of propagation tips. So check those out by following us at WDC Gardener or on our Facebook page, Washington Gardener Magazine, or by joining our Washington Gardener Google group. The embroidered patches have arrived for the GardenDC podcast, and I think they are so cute. I've already added one to my own patch collection jacket. You can get yours by being a supporter of the GardenDC podcast for as little as 99 cents a month. Just see the link in our show notes for the GardenDC support. And once you fill out a support form, send an email to me, kathyjentz at gmail.com with your mailing address, and I'll send you out the patch. In local gardening events that you might want to attend, I'd love to invite you to our garden photo show opening reception, and that's for our 18th annual Washington Gardener Photo Contest winners at Meadowbrook Botanical Gardens in Vienna, Virginia. That takes place Sunday, August 4th from 2 to 3:30 p.m. and will be in the Meadowlark Visitor Center lobby area. Also, I'd love to invite you to see me at Patuxent Nursery in Bowie, Maryland on September 8th from 2 to 3 p.m. I'm giving a talk on my book, Groundcover Revolution, along with a book signing. You can find out more about that at patuxentnursery.com, where you can sign up for the event. It is free to attend the talk, but if you'd like to purchase a book, you can do so through the nursery's registration site. Happy gardening!
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Groundcover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf, and which plants are the best ones for the job. Groundcover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Groundcover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Groundcover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and bookshop.org. In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Teri Speight, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to the supporter link in our show notes or directly to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/GardenDC/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to washingtongardener.com or washingtongardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on social media at WDC Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Pinterest, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Please take a minute to share us on social media with #GardenDC so other gardeners can find us too.